Hi everybody, it is Monday, so it's Life or Biz Wisdom for today, or this week. I want to talk to you tonight about why traditional productivity methods may not work, or in fact quite often don't work, for people who identify as being particularly creative and or spiritual. And it's very much the crux of why I have created this Facebook group, because I wanted to be able to identify and provide, hi Julia, thanks for joining, alternative ways of doing, inverted commas, doing productivity that might meet or work better for certain working styles that we might have. So I identify as actually being creative, spiritual, and also logical. And I, therefore, if you're familiar at all with the term right brain and left brain, I'm actually pretty much both of those. And many of you as members of this group may feel that you are the same, or it might be that you feel that you are highly creative and spiritual and right brain from the point of view of what I mean by that is thinking more abstractly rather than if you're very left brain, and this is where traditional productivity methods tend to be focused, is very linear. So if you're starting a project, for instance, you identify what it is you want to do, the different steps. You step from, step one, step two, step three, and you go through. And that's the way that you progress till you get to your ultimate goal. Now, for lots and lots of people, that is easily or more, pretty easily done, provided you know the steps and all that sort of stuff. But working in a linear way, in a straight line, is actually okay. And that is the way that a lot of project management in, say, corporates and that is based. But for some of us who are creative and spiritual, we want to, and therefore right-brained, we actually don't, it doesn't feel natural. And in fact, we have difficulties at times doing it. And that is because people who find that is the case for them tend to think more spatially. In other words, in space, the way things are, rather than in a straight line. So if I give you an example, someone could start, let's say, a project, and it might be that instead of, what might be seen as a linear step one, step two, step three, actually they want to go from, let's say, step one to maybe step five, because that either takes their interest or they feel intuitively that that's the way to go. Or they feel the inspiration, the passion, perhaps. And this is the thing with creatives and spirituals. Often we bring in our emotions into the way that we view things, the way that we make decisions about things, more than what might be more traditional with the more methodical left-brainers that tend to work in, as I said, in a straight line. So right brain and left brain, they're not anatomical differences. It's really a metaphor. And the other thing I want to say is that it's very much a continuum. So as I said, I'm pretty much in the middle, and there's probably lots of other people like that where I identify as being creative and spiritual, but also I do have this logical side. But there will be definitely people who are more one end, towards one end, or more towards the other. So if they're more towards the left brain end of the continuum, they think about facts. As I said, they like to work in a linear way. They aren't so interested potentially in the emotional side of things. It doesn't mean that they ever are, but it's not something that they might use when they're making the decision. As I said, it's more the facts, the here and now, and it's what you see is what you get, so to speak. It's in that respect. Whereas people who identify as being, as I said, creative, spiritual, more the right brain. And that can be, and I'm stereotyping here, I'm aware of that, but that can be creatives such as artists, musicians. It can also be spiritual mentors or people who identify as being spiritual. It doesn't have to be your work, your business focus, for instance, but it's the way that you tend to view your life and use it in your life and potentially in your business as well. And also healers, because that's where the I think the spiritual connection can come as well. And it's, again, I don't want to be stereotypical. It doesn't mean that if you're an artist or you're a healer that you are, more towards the far end of the right brain part of the end of the spectrum. But there are enough people that actually identify like that there can be some generalizations that can be made. And they're the people that I love in terms of my target market, love working with. And how this relates to productivity is that, as I said, if they start a project, it might be that they can't work in step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. They need to be able to have a bit more flexibility to be able to move around, as I said before, jumping a few steps, then maybe going back and that sort of thing. Also, if you're right brain, we often can be very visual. And I'm realizing just how visually dominant I am. And so I know that I think very much when somebody says something, I think in pictures. I understand something better when I can see it visually. And that is traditionally quite different from a lot of productivity methods that are very text-based. They are very, they tend to be, lots of words, not as many pictures. And so that can be tricky for those who are right brain dominant to be able to understand concepts and to be able to see the relationship between ideas or aspects of, thank you for the thumbs up, aspects of whatever it is that they're working on. People who are predominantly right brain will often be work in symbols. Again, that's the visualizing aspect. And so drawing for them would be much better. Oh, hello, Nazrin. Thanks for joining. Would be much easier. When I say better, easier and natural for them to do rather than a lot of writing. So, for instance, what can be useful for people who find that that's the case is to do mind mapping, which, if you're familiar with that, is more visual, and drawing. You don't have to even have a mind map as such. You could be, for instance, for a project, you could be drawing, I should say, a storyboard in pictures. I find now that I'm doing that more and more. And the pictures, that whole idea that a picture can say 1,000 words. And yes, it doesn't mean you can't use any words, but it does mean that your drawing, it's the way of expressing it that makes sense for you and that you can actually go back to and know what it refers to. And it's a lot more fun. I think I'm getting more biased the more that I actually allow what I think is my natural right side to want to do this. I might still use text, but I don't have to. I actually like to supplement it or instead use drawings. So definitely I like the storyboarding ideas. I have for quite a while really loved doing mind mapping. And that's a spatial representation where you have your central idea or topic in the circle, and then you draw your lines out with some bubbles or circles at the end. And you can actually do it using Post-it notes, and you can move around whatever the notes are or the drawing on your Post-it note, and you can change then spatially what the relationships between those maybe sub-ideas or subcategories are, rather than just writing it down in a more linear list way, which maybe somebody on the continuum that's more the left brain might actually work. Now, what are some other differences with the way that right-brainers will, and therefore creative spirituals, again, not all of them, but a lot of them will, the way that their mind may work, is that they love starting things, because being creative, they have all these ideas that, boing, 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 and, can often have a heap of ideas, which is so great. That's what's, really, really wonderful. And the tricky bit is that they want to start everything, and often at once. And what can happen then is overwhelm, because there's all these balls they're juggling in the air. And what can happen is they can actually really focus on, and prefer to focus on, a couple of them, and they leave the other balls just falling down. So things can be started, but not necessarily finished. And that can be tricky if you're wanting to progress something, whether it's in your personal life or in your business, because it takes some energy and some time and other resources to actually get the ideas moving in the first place. And if you do that, too much, it can actually mean that, as I said, you've started a whole lot of stuff, but you haven't actually finished it. And also with, particularly with creatives, is that they feel that they don't want to have too much structure. They don't want to feel hemmed in, because they can feel that it can actually then jeopardize or compromise their creativity. The very nature of creativity is supposed to be expansive and with, stereotypically without any sort of boundaries to it. But when it comes to productivity and getting things done, often there needs to be some level of containment, some amount of structure. And when there is some amount of what I like to use the word is shaping. I just think that that's a nicer sort of sounding word to use. It gets the best of both worlds, because I'm not pro right brain and anti left brain. As I said, I'm actually both of them. And I think there's such strengths with both of them. But what I don't want to have happen is for people who identify as being a right brain to feel that, and this is what I've found with clients, is why can't I get things done? Why can't I stick to a to-do list? Why can't I just get everything, done on that? Why, does the thought of writing too much in my diary, like every, 15 minutes or half an hour of my day, I've got something in the diary. It just, they can feel suffocated, pretty much suffocated. So what I like to do is actually provide a bit of shaping where there's what I call flexibility. There might be gaps in their diary, but they've got a sense of what they're working on, but they can still use some inspiration in that moment to know what, or to decide what it is they exactly work on. Now, there's a bit more to that, which I won't go through right now, because you having said that, you can't just leave it to, okay, today I feel like I'm going to do, X, Y, and Z, when it doesn't relate to maybe what your bigger vision is. So I do definitely, when I work with people, identify what their big vision is, get some goals, if that's the word that you like, to use. So it's not just coming out of the sky. There is some containment with it, but there's also the flexibility, the inspiration, the creativity within that. And that, to me, I've certainly found that's been a really good way for me to be working. I've found, having worked in corporate, I actually realise now, looking back, that a lot of the difficulties I had when I was working in corporate was that it was so left brain oriented. And as I said, I realise now how visual I am. And so reading great big slabs of text that I've done for years, most of my career, I look back now and think, oh my God, how did I do that? I really want to bring in more of the creativity. As I said, it could be drawing, it can be Using also our intuition. I mentioned that in, I think in passing, or inspiration. That's a right brain, tends to be a right brain more sort of thing. And again, in traditional left brain occupations, for instance, careers, one wouldn't necessarily, I'm not saying you wouldn't at all, because innovation can be intuition and inspiration. But there's often, for a lot of people, there's actually not a lot of that. And certainly not as much as what people who identify as being right brain would actually feel that they need to do. That's the way that their natural working style is. So I definitely take time to meditate and identify or just allow my intuition to guide me. I used to dismiss it. I didn't think I was intuitive, and that was purely because I wasn't opening up to it. And I feel that it can guide us with our productivity really, really very well once we really hone into it. And maybe we can use it with, goal setting, with brainstorming and that sort of thing. And that can be really, really useful. So there are lots of ways. I think that there are what are considered right brain aspects or activities that we can use to improve and enhance our productivity. Actually allowing time, I've talked about before, about daydreaming. And again, that's to do with inspiration and intuition. And also with right brain, I mentioned this before about using our emotions. So particularly for healers and also creatives and people who identify as being quite spiritual, it's how we feel in relation to our world, how we consider how others feel, that all becomes part of our making our decision. It's much more, people who are right brain are big picture thinkers. There's the context. Context is everything, is one of my sayings. So someone who's particularly right brain will consider the context, consider their own feelings and emotions and those of others around them in making their decisions about what it is they're going to be focusing on. As I said, it could be in your personal life or in your business. And it drives their decision making. Whereas someone who is more down the other end of the left brain continuum may not necessarily do that. It's not to say that they never do it, but certainly those who are more at the right end brain of the spectrum will definitely do it much, much more. So there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of spiritual and creative practices that can be brought in to helping with things like managing our to-dos, with managing our diaries, and project management, identifying, breaking down chunks of work into smaller sections, and also even with things like clutter, for instance. One of the things that I suggest to people, if they are feeling that clutter is a problem, and those who are particularly creative and spiritual may well be able to live with a bit of clutter. In fact, not all of them like to have everything pristine and in its order, because they can feel that it disturbs the creative process. So I've realized, and in fact I'm pleased, because it means that it lets me off the hook a little bit, because I don't have the most tidiest desk, nor do I, and I realized that, I'm okay with a little bit, but of course it's a matter of working out when is a little bit okay, and then it starts to become a problem. So for those who want some help with their clutter, where it is becoming a problem or has become a problem, one of the things that I suggest is getting them to sit with what it is that is what the clutter is, and actually do a process of looking and centering themselves and going inside themselves to understand what are the emotions with the clutter, because clutter and emotions is really, really closely connected. Usually there's some emotional need that the clutter is actually either creating for us, or actually allowing us to literally have the clutter, and therefore we're not having to deal with something else in that respect. Like it's an avoiding tactic. That's what I'm trying to say. So what I suggest to people is actually sitting with their clutter or in the room with their clutter if it's big furniture or something like that, and centering themselves, and that's where the meditation comes, and really feeling what are the emotions that come up. So it can, the emotions within yourself. It's also can be emotions that you might then identify with other people. It might actually be other people's emotions and how they're influeing your emotions. And, clutter is a great example because it tells a story. It always tells a story. There's reasons for it when it becomes a problem. So the meditating with that and the use of emotions in that way is an example of using our right brain to work on the areas of our productivity. Another one of them can be having I've talked about this before, about having a transition ritual from one thing to another. So there's some containment, and so we can finish something in a particular, whatever the time frame is, and then switch our brains to be able to start to move with something, to work with something else. And having a ritual, which can be meditating for a couple of minutes. It can be going for a walk. I believe for me, going for a walk is a spiritual process. It's a spiritual activity. Yes, this is indeed so helpful. Thank you, Nazrin. That's great. Any questions, any comments you've got, please do post them. I know for a client I work with who is very spiritual, she was able to actually had her singing bowls and the gorgeous sounds that come from that signified the end of one area of work, so to speak, one thing that she was focusing on, to then the start of another. And that becomes important when we've got a number of things to be doing during our day, and we've got some containment, as I was talking about before, where we are looking at this period of time, this is my focus. And of course I've talked a lot about before about having one focus for one thing. And if you know that you need to finish, then having that transition, that ritual, can really be helpful. And as an example, as I said, of a right brain approach is having like singing bowls or meditation or going for a walk or something like that. You don't have to have them, but for those of us who are creative and spiritual and emotional, they're the things that we really resonate with. And as I said, I find they're so much more fun for me since I've been becoming more aware of this. This has been my own journey, and I denied my right brain for so long in the corporate career I had, that I've really, really relishing these aspects of the right brain, as I said, the spiritual, creative, emotional, that I can bring into my everyday, that definitely can help the right brain aspects of me to become more productive. So I'll leave it with that. There's lots of other applications or ways that we can incorporate our right brain into productivity to make it work for those of us who, as I said before, really identify as being right brain. So it's either boring or to do the traditional left brain stuff. It's a long, great big list for someone who's really creative or spiritual is just going to, it's probably not fun for any of us if it's too long. But I don't know if you know people, maybe you do, who it's like, oh, goody, a list, great. And they get their pen out and they love crossing it off, and they've got no problems with that. But that's not the case for all of us. And as I said, it's a matter of identifying, where you think you are on the continuum. And if you want to, look at doing some of these more right brain things, bringing them into your life more and seeing if they make things a little bit easier and more fun for you. And that's it. At the end of the day, I want productivity to be fun, or as fun as is practical for everybody. And that, definitely, of course, includes me and all of you in this group. So I invite you to try some of these things. If you've got suggestions for things that you might already be doing that are working for you that you would consider more right brain. Please let me know. Put it in the comments, and we can share ideas. There's lots of others that I can share with you, and we'll do so over time. If you've got any questions about it, I encourage you also to ask me. And if you've got any suggestions that that you're trying that we could be trying, or anything like that, then please do share them. And I'd love to hear how you try it. If you think it helps you, that's great. I think it's like a lot of things, you just got to try different things and see what resonates with you. I hope it opens your mind a little bit more than perhaps it did before, if you weren't sure what I was meaning in terms of new ways, right brain ways, creative, spiritual ways to take on productivity. So I will leave it there and wish you a great night and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks. Bye for now.